So here's something you might not have noticed watching Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, because we're all way too invested in who gets the Iron Throne. Almost every major war in Westeros is fought over the same handful of buildings, and if you did notice it, you probably didn't give the buildings a second thought. But come on, we all know George R.R. Martin is famous for his world building in A Song of Ice and Fire, and frankly, the lore here is way more interesting than any real-world history. I mean, Westeros has dragons. What does our world have? So today, we're exploring castle after castle, the origins, the legends, and the defining moments of every great stronghold. And we're going to start with the stronghold of one of the most iconic houses of them all. And if you guessed Targaryen, you're absolutely right. Dragonstone. Before there was a King's Landing, before there was actually even a Targaryen dynasty as we know it, there was Dragonstone. Roughly 2 centuries before the doom of Valyria, the Valyrians took this volcanic island at the mouth of Blackwater Bay and built a fortress on it, the westernmost outpost of the Valyrian freehold, the Dragonlord Empire that dominated the known world from across the Narrow Sea. So yeah, Dragonstone predates the Targaryen conquest of Westeros by a lot. And it also doesn't look like it's shown in the television adaptations, which are downright boring if you compare it to the books. The Valyrians didn't lay stone the way ordinary masons do. They used fire and sorcery to work the rock like wet clay, and moreover, they shaped the towers to look like dragons, and also studded the walls with 1,000 gargoyles and other grotesque mystic things. Even the dungeon walls are warm to the touch because the whole thing sits on a smoking mountain, the Dragonmont. It's the House of Dragons in every possible way. Now, here's the part that makes Dragonstone matter in the long run. The Targaryens were a fairly minor Dragonlord family. Not the most powerful in Valyria at all, not like they were in Westeros for centuries. But then a Targaryen girl named Daenerys, remembered in history as Daenerys the Dreamer, foresaw the destruction of Valyria in her dream. Her father, Lord Aenar Targaryen, took the vision seriously enough to uproot everything. In 114 BC, exactly 12 years before the Doom, he sold his holdings and moved his wives, children, kin, slaves, wealth, and their 5 dragons all the way to this remote outpost. In Valyria, rivals sneered that the Targaryens had surrendered out of cowardice. But who had the last laugh when the Doom came? Every other Dragonlord family stayed behind and was wiped out, making the Targaryens the last Dragonlords in the world, all because of one girl's dream. Of the 5 dragons they brought, 4 eventually died on the island, leaving one, a young dragon that would grow into Balerion the Black Dread, who was big enough to cover a small town in shadow. And it was from Dragonstone generations later that Aegon the Conqueror launched the invasion that would forge the 7 kingdoms. And it was also on Dragonstone that Daenerys Targaryen was born during one of the worst summer storms in Westerosi history. The Red Keep. If Dragonstone is where the conquest began, then the Red Keep is where the aftermath settled. This is the Great Redstone Castle on Aegon's High Hill, overlooking King's Landing. And unlike most strongholds in this video, we know exactly who built it and roughly when, because it took 3 separate reigns to finish. When Aegon the Conqueror first landed, he built a rough timber and earth fort called the Aegon Fort. It did the basic work of a shelter, but it was definitely not the seat of an empire. Construction of the proper stone castle began in 35 AC, 35 years after his conquest, continued while his son Aenys was on the throne, and was finally completed in 45 AC under Aegon's younger son, the one history remembers as Maegor the Cruel. Maegor took personal charge of the works in 43 AC and went pretty far beyond his father's plans. The addition he's most known for is Maegor's Holdfast, a ginormous square fortress inside the overall castle, a keep within a keep. It sits behind 12 feet thick walls and is also circled by a dry moat that's lined with iron spikes. It can be crossed only by a single drawbridge. If all hell breaks loose, the royal family can retreat here and pull up the bridge. If you've read the books, and if not, why? Then you know this is where Cersei sheltered the women of the court during the Battle of the Blackwater. But Maegor's masterstroke was underground, and it was all because of his ever-increasing paranoia. All over the Red Keep and underground, there are hundreds of secret passages and tunnels, with some being so small a grown man has to crawl. He built them so that he'd always have an escape route if his enemies trapped him. And then, according to the histories, he had the workmen who built them executed, so that no one alive but the king would know the castle's secrets. It didn't work, obviously, as we know. These passages have been reused for centuries by exactly the wrong kind of people. Varys and his little birds, and Peter Littlefinger Baelish. And most infamously, during the Dance of the Dragons, a rat catcher known as Cheese, who knew Maegor's tunnels well, led the assassin blood through them to commit one of the most notorious murders in Targaryen history, the killing of the toddler Prince Jaehaerys, as revenge for the murder of Queen Rhaenyra Targaryen's second son, Prince Lucerys, by Aemon Targaryen. Winterfell. Head north. and I mean pretty damn far north, and you'll reach the oldest of them all. According to legend, Winterfell was raised roughly 8,000 years ago by Brandon the Builder, who was a mythic figure also credited with the wall itself, and it was supposedly built with the help of giants and the children of the forest. The exact date is kind of shaky, and maesters aren't entirely sure about the 8,000 years ago bit, because the further back these dates go, the shakier the records get. At a point, there probably aren't even records. But the age of Winterfell is undeniable because it's right there in the stonework, which is an amalgam of a dozen different eras piled on top of one another. The castle's most famous feature is that it's warm, which might not seem much anywhere else, but it's a whole miracle in the cold. Natural hot springs run beneath Winterfell, and the Starks channeled that hot water through the castle walls. Even in decade-long winters, Winterfell stays livable. Gardens grow food, pools steam in the courtyards, and in a land that kills unprepared travelers in days, this means the difference between life and death. The small folk have a better explanation than plumbing, and theirs is a story. And who doesn't love a good story? They say the springs are heated by the breath of a dragon sleeping beneath the castle. The story is the dragon named Vermax, aka the dragon bonded to Rhaenyra's eldest son and heir, Prince Jacaerys, once laid a clutch of eggs down in Winterfell's crypts. But that comes from a notoriously unreliable source, the dwarf fool Mushroom, who basically exists to spout tabloid gossip through fire and blood. It's a fun story, nothing else, and definitely don't treat it as part of Martin's actual lore. But the crypt is absolutely real and it's eerie as hell. So beneath Winterfell lie thousands of years of dead Starks, and each important one was carved in stone with a stone direwolf at his feet and an iron longsword across the lap of each statue. We've seen this in Game of Thrones if you remember. The reason is an ancient custom, which says it's to keep the vengeful spirits of the dead lords locked in their tombs. Ned Stark notes that the oldest swords have long since rusted away to nothing, and he wonders whether that means those ghosts are now walking around Winterfell. Must make a good bedtime story for the kids, right? Casterly Rock. Headed west now to the seat of the richest family in Westeros. Casterly Rock isn't a proper castle. Actually, it's a colossal stone hill beside the Sunset Sea, honeycombed and carved into a fortress, said to resemble a lion in repose. And the name itself is ironic because there's not a castle-y left in it. It belongs to the Lannisters. This is another one that begins with a legend instead of recorded history, and it goes back to the Dawn Age and a huntsman named Corlys, son of Castan. A lion was preying on his village's sheep, so Corlys tracked it to a cave at the base of the rock and killed the beast with its mate, but spared the newborn cubs. That act of mercy pleased the gods, who rewarded him by sending a shaft of sunlight into the cave that revealed a vein of gold in the stone. Corlys, after he founded House Casterly and fortified the cave, immediately began mining. Priorities, right? See, the divine sunbeam might be a load of bull, but the gold is definitely real, and it's still the foundation of Lannister wealth today. So how did the Lannisters get it? Through the most Lannister method imaginable, scheming. The legends say the rock was actually taken by trickery by an adventurer named Lon the Clever. There's tons of versions, but the most famous one says that Lon squeezed through a hidden crack and then hunted the Castlys, making strange noises, playing tricks, and convincing them their own home was haunted until they fled in terror and just gave it up. Other versions have him smuggling in vermin or even lions to clear the place out, and then secretly getting the Casterly daughters pregnant to further his own line, which is even more nefarious and permanent than a pretend haunting. I'll say though, the maesters are pretty skeptical that any of it happened as told. Archmaester Peristan offers a way more boring theory, that Lon was really a household guard or retainer who married a daughter of Lord Casterly, and when the Lord died without trueborn sons, the rock simply passed to the daughter and her husband, which is such an unglamorous truth that no wonder someone cooked up a story and made up some songs to cover it up. Harrenhal. Now we come to the big one, and I mean that literally because Harrenhal is the largest castle ever built in Westeros. It also happens to be the most cursed. As a good story often is, it's about ambition, but also about what happens when you realize too late that sheer size doesn't protect against everything. Its builder was Harrenhal, the last of the Ironborn kings of the Isles and the rivers, and known better as Harren the Black. His family had conquered the Riverlands, and Harren wanted a monument that would humble every other castle in the world. Easier said than done. The construction of that dream took 40 years and 3 generations of the horse to complete, on the northern shore of the God's Eye Lake. And it was built on immense suffering. Thousands of captives died, the Riverlands were stripped bare, and weirwoods that had stood there for thousands of years were cut down for its rafters and beams. And that's before the legend that human blood was mixed into the mortar. Harrenhal is absolutely friggin' enormous. 5 colossal towers, curtain walls like mountain cliffs. If you want a scale, it's about 3 times that of Winterfell. It's so big, in fact, that no lord could ever afford to garrison it or feed the army needed to hold it. And if they could, it wasn't for long. The worst part is probably the cruel timing, because the very day Harren finally took up residence in his finished magnum opus was the exact same day Aegon the Conqueror landed in Westeros. Bad luck, am I right? Harren's walls were built to repel Arties, the thickest, highest stone in the world. But what can walls do against dragonfire? Aegon marched on Harrenhal, and the Riverlanders, sick of Ironborn tyranny, rose up under Edmund Tully and joined forces with the Conqueror. Harren didn't do anything but shut his gates because he trusted that the walls would hold. He even told his men that Dragonflame couldn't burn stone, and that whatever was going on outside the walls wasn't their problem. But then Harren refused to yield by nightfall, so Aegon made sure it would be his problem. He took Balerion the Black Dread high into the dark, and then flew down inside the walls. Dragonfire burned so hot that the towers went up like candles. The stone itself cracked and partly melted, twisting into shapes that remain even in present-day Westeros. Harren and all of his sons died in the tallest tower, which is named the Kingspire after that, and so the line of House Hoare ended that night. It's probably one of the most impactful demonstrations of power in the whole saga, the biggest castle in the world and its builder undone in a single night. That's karma for Harren's ambition and the suffering he caused, I guess. And now we get into the curse. The gist of it is that since that night, every house that held Harrenhal since has met an early or violent end. There's going to be a lot of names in the next minute, so stay clocked in. So first was House Cahiris, after Aegon gave it to them, which died out pretty soon after. Then the Harroways wiped out by Maegor the Cruel, but then it could just be because it was Maegor. What he did next was award the castle to whichever of his knights could win a brutal brawl for it. Predictably, the winner, Sir Walton Towers, died of his wounds 2 weeks later, and House Towers went extinct soon after. Like, how do people still want this place? Then we get to House Strong, whose Lord Lionel and Sir Harren Breakbones burned to death in a fire at the castle during the reign of Viserys I, a fire that, according to House of the Dragon, was arranged by Larys Clubfoot Strong himself, son to Lionel and brother to Harwin. After them came the Lothstones, remembered for nothing much except being mad and cruel, and the Wents, who dwindled away. That's a lot of dying, even for Westeros. But by the time of the main series, Littlefinger is technically Lord of Harrenhal, and makes the extremely sensible decision to never step foot in the place. Also, as we know, Harrenhal is an important piece in Dance of the Dragons. It was Daemon Targaryen's rallying point in the Riverlands. He took the ruined castle almost single-handedly, flying in on Caraxes and accepting the surrender of the elderly Castellan, Sir Simon Strong, who remembered pretty damn well what a dragon had done here before. Later, after he'd parted ways with the dragon rider Nettles, Daemon returned to Harrenhal, slashing the Godswood Weirwood at dusk for 13 days. On the 14th, his nephew, Aemond, came on Vhagar. Their duel above the nearby God's Eye killed both riders and both dragons, though Daemon's body was never found. When it comes to the shows in Game of Thrones, Harrenhal becomes Tywin Lannister's base in the Riverlands and the place where Arya Stark serves as his cupbearer. Harrenhal is also where Daemon spends most of Season 2 of House of the Dragon, and it's the backdrop for Aemon and Alice's growing relationship in Season 3. The most haunted piece of real estate in Westeros, and people are still after it. Honestly, at a point, it's not the curse, it's just their own stupidity. Storm's End. On the storm-battered coast of Shipbreaker Bay, we find a castle whose origin story is a literal myth about a man declaring war on the gods and winning. Storm's End is the seat of the Storm Kings and later House Baratheon. And frankly, as someone who loves mythology, I think its legend is one of the best in Westeros. The story goes that in the Age of Heroes, a man named Durin fell in love with Elenay, the daughter of the sea god and the goddess of the wind. They married against her parents' will, and on their wedding night, the enraged gods sent a storm that smashed his castle and killed every guest and every member of his family. Only Durin and Elenay survived. Most men would take the hint. Hell, most men would run for their lives. Durin, though, he declared open war on the gods themselves. He built a second castle. They knocked it down. A third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, each larger and cleverer than the last, and each battered to rubble by the storms the gods caused. The seventh time was the charm, though, and that's the castle that held. Durin ended up reigning with Elenay at his side for 1,000 years, at what we now call Storm's End, though folktales also call it Durin's Defiance. As for how a mortal finally won against the gods, the songs can't agree. Some say the children of the forest imbued its walls with magic. Others say that a young boy who grew up to be Brandon the Builder, yeah, the Winterfell and Wall guy again, advised on its construction. To be fair, at a point, you just know these are fun songs to be sung in the pub instead of real facts. But what's completely real is the engineering. A curtain wall 100 feet high, 40 feet thick at its narrowest point, and nearly 80 feet thick where it faces the sea. A double course of stone packed with an inner core of sand and rubble. So dense, it said no wind or wave has ever meaningfully damaged it. And here's the thing, believe it or not, but this legend of a castle that cannot fall is actually held up. Storm's End has never been taken by storm or by conventional siege. The most most famous test came during Robert's Rebellion, when a young Stannis Baratheon held it for the better part of a year against the entire might of the Reach. The garrison was reduced to eating rats, and by some accounts they were on the verge of eating their own dead, until the smuggler we all know and love, Davos, slipped a small ship of onions and saltfish past the Red Wine blockade in the dark. It wasn't much good, but it kept the defenders alive until Eddard Stark broke the siege. Davos got a knighthood and the shortened fingers of one hand for his trouble, and Storm's End kept its perfect record. The Eyrie. High in the mountains of the moon sits the strangest seat in Westeros, because you can't ride to this castle. You can't even attack it in a normal way. Hell, you can barely even reach it. I'm now, of course, talking about the Eyrie, seat of House Arryn, which clings to the shoulder of a mountain called the Giant's Lance, thousands of feet above the floor of the Vale. The legend, as always, is grand. The songs say that Sir Artus Arryn, the winged knight, who drove the first men from the Vale and flew to the summit of the Giant's Lance on the back of a giant falcon to slay the Griffin King, built his castle up here among the clouds. It's the kind of gorgeous story that gets passed down through generations. But then we have the Maester's version, which is the exact opposite vibe. The historical artist, the first Arryn, actually built the Gates of the Moon, a castle at the foot of the mountain, after winning the Battle of the Seven Stars. The proper Eyrie wasn't even ordered until his grandson, King Roland the First Arryn, decided that he wanted a seat as splendid as Casterly Rock. And it wasn't built in one burst of glory. Construction stalled and restarted for centuries before it was finally done. But the thing about the Eyrie is that its defenses are entirely real and genuinely terrifying. To reach it, you climb a narrow path up the mountain, single file past 3 way castles: stone, snow, and sky. An army can only come at you one man at a time, and they'll immediately run into defenders who can just drop rocks and start avalanches. It's never been taken by conventional siege because a conventional siege is pretty much impossible. Its 2 most notorious features are actually inside. The first is the Moon Door. We saw it in the Game of Thrones, a weirwood door in the High Hall that opens into nothing but a 600-foot drop into the valley below. In the show, it was a circular hatch set directly into the floor, with the same drop. Most executions at the Eyrie just include walking a prisoner through it, easy peasy. The second is the Sky Cells. Prison cells with 3 walls and an open fourth side to the sky, with a floor that slopes gently toward the edge. A prisoner's gotta be on guard, because there's the constant feeling that he's about to roll out and into the longest and last fall of his life. Mind you, the Arryns are, by reputation throughout history, a noble and honorable house. They just also keep the single most psychologically vicious dungeon in the 7 Kingdoms. Now that is range. Highgarden. Now to the lush heart of the Reach, a castle tied through history to growth and greenery. Heck, its founding legend is literally about planting a throne. Highgarden is the seat of House Tyrell for as long as we've known it. But before they were in the picture, it belonged to House Gardener, the Green-Handed Kings. The legend goes back to Gareth Greenhand, the mystic first man of the Reach, who made the earth bloom wherever he walked, and his son, Garth the Gardener, the first king of the Reach. A detail I love is the Oaken Seat, which is a living throne of the Gardener Kings, and is said to have grown from an oak that Garth himself planted. Look, I know A Song of Ice and Fire is really reputed for being gritty, but I love it when GRRM goes full fantasy. The Gardeners ruled the Reach from that seat for thousands of years, even during the coming of the Andals, who they eventually welcomed rather than fought. And then the dragons came. And this is where House Gardener's story ends, and it's not a happy ending. During Aegon's conquest, the last Gardener King, Meryn IX, allied with Loren I Lannister of the Rock, and rode out to meet the Targaryens with a combined host that vastly outnumbered the Targaryens. They met on a dry field, and Aegon Visenya Rhaenys did something that they only did once in the entire war. Unleashed all 3 dragons, Balerion, Vhagar, and Meraxes, together at once. The result was the Field of Fire. 4,000 men of the combined Lannister and Gardener army burned alive. Another 1,000 fell to swords and spear and arrow, and some 10,000 more were left with severe burns. Among the dead were King Mern and every single person in his family. One nephew survived the battle only to die of his burns 3 days later, and when he died, House Gardener died with him. An unbroken line lasting thousands of years, gone in one battle. Highgarden itself was never burned. After the Fields of Fire, Aegon marched on the castle, and its steward, a man named Harlan Tyrell, whose family had served the Gardeners as high stewards for centuries, just opened the gates and surrendered without a fight, much like Simon Straw. Aegon rewarded this pragmatism. He handed House Tyrell all of Highgarden and made them Lords Paramount of the Reach, as well as Wardens of the South. The problem was that the Tyrells weren't related to the Gardeners, and could only claim descent from Garth Greenhand through the female line, and several older Reach houses, especially the Florents, had stronger blood claims. They protested bitterly about serving upjumped stewards, but to no avail. The Florents and the rest had marched against Aegon at the Field of Fire, but the Tyrells had handed him a castle, so of course Aegon made sure they won that particular dispute. Loyalty, not lineage, won the Reach. Riverrun. Not every great castle has to do something legendary. Riverrun, the seat of House Tully, is a masterclass in using the landscape you've got. It's not especially large, it's about a tenth of Harrenhal's size, but its position makes it one of the hardest castles in Westeros to take. Riverrun was built by an early Tully ancestor, named Sir Axel Tully, who is said to have raised the red sandstone castle after receiving the land from an Andal king named Armistead Vance. Though this is really early in the history of the Riverlands and everything is murky enough that I gotta warn you, take this with a grain of salt. So the genius here is the location, at the exact point where the fast Tumblestone River slams into the wider, slower Red Fork, hence the name, got it? Two of the castle's three sides are protected by those rivers. The third side faces a massive man-made ditch. But the cleverest part isn't about nature. In peacetime, that ditch is just a dry canal. But when in danger, the Tullys open the sluice gates and let the rivers flood it, turning Riverrun into a literal island. Now consider that most soldiers can't swim, and if they can, they learn in ponds. A rushing river is a whole different beast. The moat's too deep to wade, too wide to bridge easily, and then there's the defenders shooting down the walls that rise directly from the waterline. Assaulting it is pretty much a guaranteed and watery suicide. Properly stocked, Riverrun can feed its garrison for 2 years and simply wait attackers out, which makes its fate in the main series all the worse because Riverrun was never stormed. It was handed over. After the Red Wedding, control of the castle was awarded to House Frey as a reward for their betrayal. But the Blackfish, Sir Brendan Tully, retook it and held it stubbornly against everything they threw at him. But then Jaime Lannister shows up with the hostage Ebnir Tully, and even though the Blackfish was ready to die in the castle he was born in, Jaime used Ebnir, the rightful head of House Tully, against the soldiers of Riverrun, who are sworn to obey their liege lord no matter what. They opened the gates, and the rest was history. So the lesson here, kids, is that walls can stop armies, but can't do a thing against treachery. Or dragons, but we already covered that. The twins. I get that no one likes the phrase, but we gotta talk about their castle, which made them, and also the crossing that damned them. The twins is a funny name until you realize it's accurate. Two nearly identical stone castles, one on each bank of the Green Fork of the Trident, joined by a great fortified bridge with a tower, the Water Tower, standing guard. It's one of the most strategically important structures in all of Westeros, and I'll tell you why. It's the only bridge across the Green Fork for hundreds of miles in either direction. The phrase actually started out as a petty house. The whole thing began about 600 years ago before the War of the Five Kings, when an ambitious minor lord built a shaky wooden bridge across the narrowest part of the river. It took the family 3 generations to rebuild it in stone and raise a tower on each bank. But once they had it, they basically printed money. They charged a toll on everyone who wanted to cross and grew rich and strong on it. Older and prouder houses sneer at the phrase as up-jumped toll collectors to this day. But hey, at the end of the day, who has to pay the toll and who collects it? Its importance in battle was also plenty. An army marching between the north and the western riverlands has to cross at the Twins, or take a lengthy detour around it, which is precisely why in the War of the Five Kings, Robb Stark needed Walder Frey's permission to bring his hosts south, which is why he had to buy that permission with a marriage pact to wed a Frey girl. Now we all know how that went. Both in the books and in the show, Robb broke the pact by marrying someone else, and Walder Frey made sure he lost his head for it, breaking the sacred protection of guest right at the event that will forever define the Twins, the Red Wedding. The Freys got their vengeance, and eventually, one by one, they got what was coming to them for it, for Arya in the show and Lady Stoneheart in the books. Pyke, seat of House Greyjoy in the Iron Islands, isn't very popular, nor is it particularly famous, but what it is unusual. Unlike every other great castle in this video, there's no stories or records about who built it. Its origins are completely lost. But what the Ironborn do have is a myth, and it's equally strange and just as soaked in salt as the castle. I've always loved stories about the sea, so this is a particular favorite of mine, and it's actually so cool. So their legend is the Grey King, who is said to have ruled for 1,000 years and a day, had taken a mermaid to wife, and slain Naga, the first and mightiest sea dragon, a monster so vast she fed on krakens and leviathans and could drown islands against her fury. The Grey King killed her with the help of the drowned god, and built his great hole on top of her bones on the island of Old Wick. Naga's ribs became the beams and pillars, her jaws became his throne, and he warmed the hall with her own living fire. These ribs still stand on Naga's Hill today. The maesters, being maesters, allow that the bones are real enough, but they suspect they actually belong to some large whale. Pyke itself has a fate that no other castle has. It's literally falling into the sea. Exactly. It's like a desolate medieval version of Venice. Though it started as a single fortress built on a headland jetting out into the ocean over centuries, the restless waves of the Iron Islands have eroded and collapsed the land. What's left is a castle broken into pieces. Its keeps and towers now stranded on 3 barren islands and a scatter of bare sea stacks, connected to one another by swaying rope and plank bridges over the crashing surf. Pyke is the perfect symbol for the Ironborn. Hard, bleak, defiant, and slowly losing its war with the sea. Sunspear. We end in the far south, at the one castle that can boast something no one else can. It belongs to a kingdom that the dragons never conquered. Sunspear, the seat of House Nymeros Martell, is the capital of Dorne, and it doesn't look or feel like anywhere else in the Seven Kingdoms. And that's because its story comes from across the sea. Sunspear grew out of an older, humbler keep called the Sandshift, a squat, sandy-colored building said to look like a warship washed ashore and turned to stone. This was the OG seat of House Martell, which was pretty minor back then. Everything changed around 700 years before Aegon's conquest, when the warrior Queen Nymeria arrived. Her people, the Rhinar, had been driven from their homeland on the Riverrun by the expanding Valyrians, and she led them across the sea in a fleet the songs say numbered 10,000 ships. The Maesters, as always, are dubious. One scholar, Beldekar, argues that the true figure was inflated, perhaps tenfold, but come on, even a fraction of 10,000 is an armada like never before. So after landing at Dorne, Nymeria did something crazy. She burned her own fleet on the shore, which meant that her people could never turn back. She then married Lord Mors Martell, and together they united all of Dorne under the Sun and Spear. The castle they built reflects that fusion. Sunspear is built in the Rhinosh style, unlike anything else in the rest of Westeros. A warren of structures built together over centuries, dominated by two great towers that are the first things any visitor sees. The tall, slender Spear Tower and the great domed Tower of the Sun, where the ruling prince of Princess of Dorne holds court. I mean, the literal name is part of that fusion. The Martell Spear and the Rhoynish Sun. Women can inherit the throne of Dorne without the insane amounts of fuss it would cause everywhere else in Westeros. No matter the gender, the eldest child inherits, but that's not the only thing that makes Dorne unique. When Aegon and his sisters came with their dragons, the Dornish refused to give them a battle to win. Having heard what happened at the Field of Fire, they hid within their deserts and mountains and fought a guerrilla war, striking supply lines then vanishing. The Targaryens couldn't hold what they couldn't pin down. Dragons are amazing, but they can only do so much. Even later, during the vicious campaign known as the Dragon's Wrath, Dorne endured. It's the only region of Westeros that was never conquered by dragonfire. In the end, Dorne joined the Seven Kingdoms the only way it ever could, on its own terms, peacefully, nearly 200 years after Aegon landed, through the marriage of King Daeron II's sister Daenerys to Prince Meryn Martell. And the Martells still kept their own laws, their Rhinosh customs, and the unique right to call their ruler a prince or princess. Through everything, House Nymeros Martell remained unbowed, unbent, and unbroken. Kudos to them for that. If you actually put these castles in a lineup and study their history, you'll realize that almost every one of them was raised from the same impulses: defiance, ambition, desperation, and survival. And even thousands of years later, these same walls are still standing, mostly, and sit at the center of every major war. So, tell me down in the comments, which castle's origin surprised you the most? Which one would you like to stay in the most? And would you be scared of Harrenhal's ghosts? And which one should we dig into properly next time? If you like this video, hit like, subscribe to our channel, and ring that notification bell. That way you don't miss our next marvelous video. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, and as always, stay marvelous.